We're live now.
Thank you.
Thank you very much and welcome everybody to this meeting of the Combined Authority. We have a few items on the agenda to get through, so let's start. Have we any apologies for absence?
Yes, we've got an apology from York, Councillor Keith Aston, and we are expecting Councillor de Gorn, but he hasn't joined yet.
Okay, lovely. We'll anticipate him joining shortly. Declarations of disclosable pecuniary interests. Anybody got any disclosable pecuniary interests on the agenda? Having looked at the agenda, is there anything people want to declare? Councillor Galton.
But it's not pecuniary, Chair, but I shan't be taking part in the debate about the expenses for the Deputy Mayor, given my candidacy.
That's fine, fine. Anybody else, anything? No. In that case, just note that. And then exclusion of the press and public. I don't think there's any reason to do that today, is there, Ruth?
No, we haven't anything.
Lovely. So minutes of the meeting of the Combined Authority held on 9th of March. Those have been circulated with the agenda. Is there anything anybody wishes to raise as a correction, or are we happy with those as a correct record of that meeting? That seems fine. So I take it we're all happy to have those a correct record of the meeting at the 9th of March. Moving on then to the first item on the agenda, substantive item, which is about COVID-19. Obviously this has been sorry, somebody said something there?
Sorry.
Councillor Shabir.
My apologies, Chair. My apologies.
All right, okay. Did you want to say something? Are you on?
No, I was talking to somebody else.
All right, okay, okay, fine. Item on the agenda, COVID-19. This has been a regular item on our agenda as we've moved throughout this incredible year, really. Obviously, it has been something that all the local authorities present today have been working on flat out over the last year. And of course, people have lost their lives, and we give condolences to all the families who've lost people and all the friends who've lost people. We're in a more positive frame of mind as a country at the moment as we come out of lockdown. The vaccinations have been really well progressed at local level, and we thank our local NHS for all the work they've done on that. The Combined Authority, though, focuses very much on the economic side of things. So it's local authorities who do children's services and adult services. At the Combined Authority level, they're principally thinking about transport, the economy, skills, all the things that stimulate economic growth. And therefore, the item you see on the agenda about COVID-19 is largely around that. So this paper speaks about business support and the skills programme that we're going to be funding, the West Yorkshire Economic Recovery Plan that has been worked on over the last year with the support of partners from business and third sector and from the police, in fact, a wide range of people. And also about how we safely open our communities for businesses and how we support our transport system to open up to more people again. So I'm going to start this item with the Officer Brian Archer presenting. Brian, are you there? Yes, you are. Would you like to present this paper? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'll just start with some economic insights, and then I'll talk through how the Combined Authority is responding to some of the challenges. The GDP figures were published last week, up 0.4%, which was well received and encouraging. The number of workers that are currently on furlough remains unchanged at around 18%. So again, there's still going to be some big challenges when those people come off furlough and enter the labour market. We have seen an increase in footfall in some of the urban centres, particularly Leeds, Bradford and Huddersfield, where they have seen an increase in footfall of over 57%, which is again encouraging. We're starting to see some green shoots in terms of economic recovery. The other point to note is we've not seen a marked increase in business liquidations, although some sectors of the economy have been disproportionately affected, in particular personal services, hair and beauty businesses, where we've seen a higher level of business failures. 30% of the firms recently surveyed as part of the ONS Business Insights survey were saying they've got less than 3 months cash reserve. So cash is still an issue and a challenge for businesses in West Yorkshire. As of the end of last week, in terms of our response to that particular challenge, £282 million of grants have been dispersed to over 107,000 firms, which is an incredible achievement. The sheer volume of applications and the value of grants that have been dispersed certainly making a difference, and hopefully reducing the number of business liquidations. In West Yorkshire, as of 6th of April, 350 firms were liquidated. Now that was down from 850 a couple of weeks earlier. So again, a positive trend. I think some of the support that's been delivered is starting to make a difference. Still got challenges in terms of the demand side and vacancies. We saw the biggest declines in Wakefield and Kirklees, around 9% reduction in vacancies. So again, working hard through the reboot programme and the employment hub to get workers matched up to some of those opportunities. But in terms of the, if you like, the addressable labour market for job opportunities, that appears to be shrinking at the moment. So we've still got some challenges in that regard. It's good to see bus patronage increasing as well. That's been up 45% to normal levels. Obviously, schools have returned and the retail sector is starting to reopen. So again, some positive news there. Operationally, we continue to take forward the economic recovery plan. We're quite advanced in developing our entrepreneurship proposition, which is to encourage more business startups across the economy, as well as our zero carbon proposals and looking at what we can do to support health tech and innovation and some of the high growth business support. Nationally, we've also seen the announcement of the local skills improvement plan Trailblazers, which will be business led. There's around 4 million available nationally, so not a great deal of money, but again, it's encouraging to see more money going into the skills agenda. I suppose if I take one of the advantages and one of the benefits of devolution, if I look at the employment and skills team within the combined authority, our budget this year will increase from 17 million to 111 million. So, you know, alas, one of the benefits of devolution is we've got the tools to do the job and start to intervene in, you know, in the labour market and work with providers to address some of the challenges that we've got. We continue to roll out the Kickstart programme, the Reboot programme, and provide support for EU exit. And I'll stop at that, Chair, if I may. Thank you. Happy to take questions.
Thank you, Brian. I won't mind bringing Kim Groves before I open up to questions as well, just about the open up the transport and network.
Thank you, Chair. So since the 12th of April, as Brian said, we're up to around 45%. In the last couple of days, it's gone to 55 to 60% in terms of bus patronage. So while social distancing remains in place, it is constraining the capacity. So we are in a situation where we may have to leave people behind at bus stops. But we've been preparing for that because we have been pushing for more funding to put duplicates into the system. We're having to pull them off the school duplicates to put them in at busy times to cope with that demand. We've included occupancy information on our real-time information displays and on our app so that passengers can see how busy that bus is. And we are the first region in the UK to implement that. In terms of rail, usage has increased since the 12th of April, but it's still around a quarter of what we would expect normally. And the timetable, there will be a timetable change for rail on the 16th of May, and then the services will be restored to pre-pandemic. But on both bus and rail, we're obviously working closely with the operators to look at those new markets that may emerge and make sure that we've got the offers right, and as well as catering for leisure. So we know that people are going to work differently, different hours, and we're just preparing for that.
Thank you, Councillor Groves. It's a Leviathan effort, isn't it, really, to get people back into public transport safely, though. And obviously, as we open up the economy, it is really important we all give the message out to constituents that we need to keep each other safe, and that is a hands, face space wherever you are is still really, really important to preserve lives. I'll just bring questions now from Roger Marsh. Roger, did you want to say something else about economic points of view as a LEP chair?
Indeed. Good morning, everybody. I'm glad to see everybody's fit and fighting, which is good to see. A comment first. Trailblazer is an interesting descriptor for that programme, and in that narrative, it's even more interesting that LEPs are not referred to as business-led organisations. I'm not sure where some of the script writers are in DFE in terms of that which government created. That's just a comment. My clarification question, Brian, was: did I hear you say that grants, the 288 million, have been paid out to 107,000 businesses? And if I did hear that, do you mean 107,000 businesses, or there's been 107,000 recipients, of which there may have been multiple? There may have been various iterations, so that the number of businesses actually is a lower number. It's, again, I'm not a trick question, because I was struck the fact if it is 107,000 businesses out of 130,000 as a total stock, gosh, that's quite staggering, and that rather surprised me. And I'm not sure whether it surprised me in a negative or a positive way. It would just surprise me. That's why I wanted to just clarify it, as again, it's not meant to be a trick question. I
can't imagine those are unique businesses, are they this? So Brian,
there'll be multiple applications in there, Roger, so that there won't be unique businesses. I don't have the detailed breakdown, but I'm sure we can get the figures from our local authority colleagues.
I just wanted to clarify, because if it's the level of support of our business stock was pure, that perhaps suggests an underlying economic challenge that we may not have properly calibrated. That's why I wanted to just test it, that's all. And I'm reassured with that, because I thought that would be the answer. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Roger. Councillor Galton.
Thanks, Chair. It's a question on skills, because Brian mentioned how we will have money at our disposal to put into adult education. I'm not sure it's new money. I think it's money that has previously been spent by central government. So I'm hoping you'll be able to answer a question about government and its clawback of further education colleges, where during COVID last year, they were allowed to deliver 2/3 of their programme and not have their funding affected. And now the threshold apparently for this year has been raised to 90% that they're expected to deliver out of their programme. Otherwise, the government will be clawing back a lot of money. And I wondered if we as a combined authority responsible for adult education had done any kind of work with our further education colleges to understand how far this could affect them, because they could lose a lot of money, which basically supports their basic operation. And if they are undermined early on, we'll be less able to deliver that COVID recovery retraining that we hope to achieve as a combined authority. Have we got any information, Brian?
Thanks, Councillor Galton. First of all, you're partially correct with the money. It's £63 million is the adult education budget, which was spent centrally and is now going to be spent regionally, but it still gives us more control as a region. And therefore, the direction of travel is welcome, although it doesn't mean seismic shifts this time, of course. We've got to keep some continuity. We obviously don't get all the money that is spent in colleges, so that a lot of that, the money for FE, goes direct to the colleges. Brian, is this the FE white paper that Councillor Galton is referring to?
Yeah, I mean, the clawback announcement came to light in the last couple of days. I think the minister announced that there would be potentially a clawback threshold of around 90% if an FE college didn't achieve the required level of success rates. Now, that will have a material impact on some FE colleges, and obviously as part of the procurement process, we'll be working with the FE sector and private providers to make sure that they've got sufficient financial resilience to be able to absorb the shocks. And I guess that due diligence process will need to take into account historic success rates and likely clawback. And I think we will need to be nimble and fleet of foot to redeploy any potential underspend to other providers that can deliver at the required success rates. So it will be a big change, and it will be very stretching for some of our FE providers. And some providers are already operating at the margins. I was on a call with the FE Commissioner yesterday with regards to an FE college who are a potential grant provider in difficulty. The Commissioner's looking at options for merger with regards to that organisation, and the higher threshold, success rate threshold, and the potential for clawback is a material risk for the sector. I think we do need to do a risk assessment and understand all the implications and get all the detail, and then feed that back to the Skills Funding Agency to mitigate that. But it is a concern, absolutely, and we'll work with providers to try and mitigate that risk.
I do find it very frustrating that FE colleges aren't properly funded. They have a really massive job to do in upskilling residents to be able to be financially resilient in the future, and to try and make them operate like businesses, each one of them, really distracts them from what they should be doing. So it does frustrate me, I'm afraid, Councillor Galton, and I'm sure you share that frustration. Councillor Paulson, you have a question.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just on page 12, the table at 2.4, I think that gives quite a good picture at a glance of, sort of how many businesses have been supported through this difficult time, and obviously continuing, and the sheer volume of funding that's come from the government to our area. I did suggest that it would be useful to know how much money is left in any of these pots, whether it's through the local authorities or through WYCA directly. It tells us a number of businesses that have been supported, but we've no idea how much money has gone to businesses. So I did suggest that this report would be more useful if we knew that, for instance, just take the top line, 200 million funding, 70,000 payments. Does that mean now the pot is empty, or is there still funding going out of that pot? Because there have been some issues, I think more of a local authority level, that some businesses are saying there's been delays to getting things like the ARG grants out. So it will be good to reassure us, I think, that we are doing everything as we can across West Yorkshire to support all the businesses with what funding they are entitled to.
Thanks, Councillor Paulson. I mean, I'm sure we can provide that information. I think it's been a challenge all the way along, actually, because for any money, the government sent out money without knowing really how many businesses would be eligible. So inevitably at the end of a cycle, and they usually set a deadline to government saying any grant by this date, we as West Yorkshire have gone back to government and said, the leftover money that you've not enabled us to spend, can we keep that, spend on other economic development? And they have always said no. And in fact, at one point we were saying we're going to withhold it. So any opportunity you've got to press that point home, that we can keep that money in the north and not send it back to Westminster, would be really welcome. I think it's a good point made, but I'm sure we can provide that information in the next report.
We can, yes.
Any other questions or comments for Brian, or indeed Dave Pearson and Councillor Groves? No, well sorry, Councillor Lee, you just came at the very last minute then.
Thank you, Chair. I did have my hand up.
Oh, Polly, I didn't see your hand, sorry.
No, I just blend into the background sometimes. Just a comment about your summary of the FE funding. I don't think there's a lack of government funding here. All that's being said is if they don't use it in the manner that it's intended, it would go back. And so surely the thing that we should be concentrating on, if there's anything to go back, it's because they're failing to perform properly. And that's what we should be doing, improving the performance, not whinging about the money going back if they don't perform. That's just a conservative view, I think.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. I mean, I'd encourage you to speak to your local FE colleges, because it's they do have to operate with one hand tied behind their back, from what I understand, in that they have measures to meet which are set by central government, but they're not given the tools to do the job properly. And I do think that the FE sector particularly has been a Cinderella service for far too long, for many, many years. And we need to fund it properly and make sure that our young people and those people who are wanting to re-enter the labour market after a period out of the labour market are given a fair chance at success. And I do think it's a real crucial service that we should be funding properly. So I speak on authority, really. I have been spoken to a lot of colleges around West Yorkshire, and I think you'd be well-minded just to have that conversation, Councillor. It's not a political point, it's a practical point.
Chair, could I just, thanks for your advice. It's probably very good advice, but for your information, I've been a governor of Huddersfield New College for 12 years and chair of the Quality Committee, so I'm well aware of the sector, and I think that colleges like that are forward-thinking and would be unlikely to have to send any money back. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, that's a sixth form college though, isn't it, Councillor Lee? I'm thinking very much of the bigger colleges that we've got on our patch. So Calderdale College, for example.
A little bit rubs off if you're on a governor of a large college that's developing in any area. So yeah, it is a sixth form college. Maybe that excludes me from having my views, perhaps.
No, I'm happy to have a view, but I just encourage you to go and speak to some more colleges. That's all I'm saying, Councillor Lee. Roger Marsh.
Yeah, I just wanted to come in and remind colleagues that the Skills Capital Programme, which obviously we deployed up until March of this year across our FE cohort, and you'll have seen evidence of it right across West Yorkshire, that uniquely, and it is still uniquely, that in return for those public monies, we, the LEP and the Combined Authority, secured and entered into delivery agreements. In other words, what were colleges going to do so as to help up the skill provision in the region? I won't claim it's all been successful, but at least there was an attempt to link the provision of public money for facilities, 21st century facilities rather than barely repaired Victoriana, with the skills requirements of business. And I am concerned that the delinking of that investment approach, we need to do, we will take steps to ensure that those two things go together, rather than, I think, some of the thinking that's behind the likes of Trailblazers and others. And that's not, again, it's just, it feels to me like people haven't thought out the delivery consequences rather than the policy narrative when it comes to what's going to be necessary for our young folk, let alone those at the other end of the age spectrum, where we're trying to retrain and provision for digitally enabled jobs. But as I say, I'm not making a criticism or an adverse comment. I'm just, I think, waving a little bit of a flag there about what we've done, and actually what we hopefully will do together, however the rules are constructed, to ensure that across our however many colleges there are, that we ensure there's a consistency of approach to delivering skills right across the region. Lovely, thank you, Roger. Skills is such an important part of what we can do as a combined authority going forward, and obviously there's a massive challenge there for us that we need to fulfil. So that paper is for noting. With those comments then, I'll go on to the next item on the agenda, which is about the UK Community Renewal Fund. And this is something which has suddenly come in March through budgets from government. We've got to turn it around quite quickly and put in bids quite quickly. It is a centralised competitive funding element again, which is something that local authorities up and down the country are not keen on, because obviously we all need support for community renewal, and our need in Bradford, for example, is no greater than need in Wakefield or anywhere else, yet we seem to have to compete with each other. And there is actually a really tight turnaround for this. So all the projects, my understanding is they've got to be actually delivered by March, end of March next year. So is Ben, are you speaking on this?
Chair, I think it's Alan Rees.
I can.
Oh, Alan, over to you.
Yeah, so I mean, you've summarised it. The combined authority is the lead authority for the Community Renewal Fund. We are our what that means is that we have to assemble a short list of bids and submit them to government. It is then government's decision what of those schemes get funded. There are priority areas and other areas. So there are 3 priority areas in West Yorkshire: Bradford, Calderdale and Wakefield, and then Kirklees and Leeds are not identified as priority areas. There can still be bids from those areas, but government will likely not score them as highly as bids from those priority areas. The vast majority of the process is laid out in rules set down by central government, so it is a heavily centralised process, and there are a range of tasks that are prescribed for the combined authority to deliver as the lead authority. So our role being to invite bids from a range of applicants. We have done that. The invitation to bid is now live with a deadline of applications by the 7th of May. And that sets out the investment priorities and sets out the criteria that we want people to comply with, and obviously it's focused on economic recovery and growth. Secondly, we need to appraise and prioritise a short list of projects up to a maximum of £3 million per place, so that's £15 million for West Yorkshire. That needs to be submitted by the 18th of June, who, as I said, will assess the proposals. We then need to enter into a funding agreement with government, and we will get the results in late July 2021. So following that, we will then enter into grant agreements with the organisations who have been successful. And as you say, all the money needs to be spent and delivery complete by the 31st of March 2022. So in reality, there will be about a 7-month period for these projects to be delivered. So it's extremely tight. There's been a range of work done with stakeholders as soon as the announcement was made, to encourage people to identify whether or not they wanted to bid. Nearly 150 people have attended our stakeholder events, and we're in regular communication with them. There's a role for local authorities here as well. So every local authority has identified a single point of contact to help bring partners together and develop bids and avoid duplication and ensure that bids are linked with local priorities. And secondly, there is a representative of each local authority involved in the appraisal panel to ensure that the final shortlists best meet local need. So the recommendation is simply that the combined authority notes the Community Renewal Fund and the role of the combined authority, and authorises the managing director to finalise and submit the shortlists to government on the combined authority's behalf. That is because there is not a meeting of the combined authority between now and the deadline. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. And just a reassurance, I suppose, as well, that the local authorities will have sight of the list and have input into it before the managing director is delegated to make that decision. Obviously, all these projects need linking into strategic objectives at local authority level. Alan, you're on mute.
Yeah, and that's part of the purpose of having them on the appraisal panel and involving the single point of contact before the bids are submitted.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Galton, you had a question.
Thanks, Chair. I have to say this approach is really centralised, isn't it? It's an irony that a devolved authority is looking after a very centralised bidding mechanism. It was just about maximising our capacity to get results, because you've noted that 3 authorities are in the priority group and 2 are not. Is there any advantage, therefore, in creating cross-boundary schemes or prioritising them so that the top priority authority might pull the lower prioritised authority over the line, and then we get the maximum amount, so we get the full 15 instead of the likely 9 million? Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Galton. So is there a bit of tipping and ladling we can do there in terms of maximising the amount of impact it has across the region? We do like to collaborate, and we have done for many years, but it's not a scheme that really encourages collaboration from what I can see. Alan, can you comment on that?
Well, what I would comment on is that there are let me start that again. The combined authority itself can bid as well on behalf of the whole region. and is currently considering whether or not to do so. There are some officers involved, myself included, who are not involved in that process in order to ensure that there are appropriate ethical rules in place, but the combined authority can bid on behalf of the whole region.
So there's your answer. We've yet to see what's going to come through that initial sifting process. The first Councillor Golan is the answer to that. Any further questions, comments? Okay, well, obviously the decision here is, because it's such a short time frame that the government have given us for bidding, that we need to act quickly, and the managing director needs to be delegated to make that submission. But as we've heard, that's going to be done in consultation with the individual local authorities to make sure it's joined up and there's no surprises. So with that, I'm happy to propose that as a recommendation. Can I see all those in favour, please show? Thank you, that is carried. Thank you very much for that. So moving on now to item 7, which I believe is the capital investment programme. Councillor Jeffrey, did you want to come in on this item? Councillor Jeffrey, you seem to be silent, even though you don't look to be on silent. Is it just me, or can anybody else hear? Can anybody else hear Councillor Jeffrey? No, nobody can hear. It's not just me. Councillor Jeffrey, shall I just go to, is Roger? Roger, are you able to say anything on this? And then I'll go back to Councillor Jeffrey. She just seems to have some problems with sound at the moment. As your vice chair, aren't you, of that committee?
I am certainly deputy chair of that committee, although I didn't actually attend the most recent meeting. I think to help Councillor Jeffrey, the paper sets out that actually we're not seeking any approvals in this meeting from the combined authority. More rather, we're informing of the decisions made by previous investment committees, if I'm correct, between the last time this combined authority met and today, of the decisions made under the delegated authorities. And there are various schemes set out there across the various funding pots that that are currently available. And I think I'll probably pause there just to see whether there are any particular questions, although and I would, in the absence of Councillor Jeffrey, try to answer them on any particular schemes, but I'd also look to perhaps Ben and any other officers that might be able to support me in the circumstances I described at the outset.
Thank you. I think Councillor Jeffrey is just coming back into lands. Let's see if that works better. Councillor Jeffrey, are you with us?
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Yes.
Oh, great.
Excellent.
Unfortunately, I don't know what Roger has said, but obviously these schemes went through the last 2 committees, fairly straightforward, stages 1, 2 and 3. The report is for noting, but I know that Melanie, if anyone has any questions of individual schemes, Melanie can answer that, but it's fairly straightforward. It was quite a slim agenda this time.
Thank you very much, Councillor Jeffrey. Glad to have you back in full audio.
Just to reassure Councillor Jeffrey, completely unrehearsed, I said pretty much the same thing. So at least we're consistent in our tale.
We're a good team, Roger.
Anybody any questions or comments? Councillor Groves.
Yeah, Chair, we're just really going to comment, and as the paper lays out, the amount of funding that's gone out of the door and delivering on these schemes, particularly on the transport hubs in the connecting the communities, the rail packages, the stations, and, you know, the 183 million delivered by Leeds. And we're now following that with the Transforming Cities, 317 million. So proving that as a region, we can deliver. So we should really, you know, be really pleased with all the outcomes that have been provided. And I know it'll follow later when we're talking about scrutiny boards, but I think in terms of the assurance framework that we've got in place is so robust. It's one of the best in the country. And hopefully when we get new members of scrutiny, they'll go through all that training. So I'll leave it there, Chair.
Thank you very much. I just, as Councillor Jeffrey has mentioned there, it's been through investment committee, so I'm happy to propose that's fine. Let's go through. All those in favour, please show. Thank you very much. I believe that is carried. Thank you. So now then, moving on to the next item on the agenda, which is Mca Governance, and includes the results of the deliberations of the Independent Remuneration Panel, which has supported the governance arrangements of the Combined Authority all the way through this year, which has been huge amounts of work to do. And Caroline, are you going to speak on this paper? You also, as sort of city solicitor, have been very busy this year sorting out everything, all the bureaucracy that is needed to make sure that we're complying with the government's edicts and making sure that we're running things properly. So Caroline, do you want to say something about this paper?
Absolutely. Thank you, Chair. Firstly, apologies. I recognise that this is quite a hefty tome of a paper that I'm bringing before you. But as you say, this is about ensuring that clarity and transparency in terms of how we currently work and how we will work as we go forward is published and is accessible to all, and we're as clear as we can be around how we operate the organisation. So the report in front of you, as you say, is in 3 parts. The first part is in relation to the constitutional aspects, and the second 2 parts are in respect of 2 reports that we have from the IRP in relation to scrutiny allowances and the Deputy Mayor for Policing and Crime. Just taking if I just spend a moment or two highlighting at a very high level the constitutional documents, then I'm happy to stop at that point if there are any detailed questions or inquiries, and then I'll move on to the other 2 parts. Members have already seen part of the Constitution come forward. Indeed, at the March meeting, there was a significant chunk of that brought to you. What we have here initially is at Appendix 1, we have a timeline setting out those elements that are coming forward this time and those that will come forward at the annual meeting in June. And the Constitution itself is split into 7 parts, and the covering report tries to take us through each of these appendices in relation to those parts of the report. So Appendix 2 to the cover report is effectively the introduction to the Constitution. So it is that bit of the Constitution that members, officers, members of the public and business can go to actually in one location see what the membership is made up of, and very much the sort of the high level information around the organisation, and also definition of the terms that are used throughout the Constitution itself. So hopefully that element should be fairly straightforward. Appendix 3 is the second part of the Constitution, which are called the Articles. And the Articles are intended to set out the legal and regulatory framework behind our functions, our responsibilities, our procedures. It is quite detailed. It is simply meant to be a reflection of the baseline statutory framework. So whether that's in the Act, whether it's in our order, in terms of what can and can't happen. And the sections of the Articles that you have in front of you this time are set out at paragraph 2.7 of the report in a table. So this is the second and last chunk of the Articles. The first part of these came to you at the March meeting, and cover matters as diverse as police and crime commissioner functions, the LEP decision making, audit and ethical arrangements. It isn't proposing, I suppose, just to give some assurance to members, this section doesn't set out any subjective or discretionary proposals as to how this will operate. This is simply meant to be reflecting the framework as we have it to deal with. So hopefully, despite the length of that section, it gives some assurance around that. Part 3, which is set out in Appendix 4, comes under the area of responsibility for functions, and this does introduce something new for members, which is the protocol for the exercise of concurrent functions and statutory consents. A little bit of a mouthful, but what this is intended to do, and hopefully it's clear from the document itself at Appendix 4, when we got our new powers under the order, A number of those ones are powers that we share with partner councils. And equally, some of those functions that we have are ones where we need the consent of the partner council to exercise them. So, for example, acquisition of land for housing development is a function that the district councils already have and which we now have as well. It is a function that what the protocol seeks to do is to set out a process as to how we will work together where we are looking to exercise one of those functions, and the process we would undertake if we were looking to seek your statutory consent, a district council statutory consent to one of those functions. Again, in terms of reassurance, the document in front of you has been a collaborative effort, a collaborative exercise between the heads of legal, between myself and fellow heads of legal at the West Yorkshire districts. And has gone through each of the cabinets in your district authorities. I should say for completeness, and it is set out in the report, the report that went forward to Bradford did propose some additional wording to that in the document in front of you, which the other authorities haven't taken forward, which is perhaps a little more prescriptive around some of the timelines within this. We aren't proposing that those are taken forward. I've had further discussion with the city solicitor at Bradford, and she accepts our position on that. But it's meant to be a collaborative document. The proposal is it's not legally binding, and it will be reviewed within the year. So I'm happy to take any questions on that. Chair, if there are any. Continuing to move forward, paras 215 onwards, introduce a new budget and policy procedure rules into the procedure part of the Constitution, which relates to the Mayor's budget and policies. Again, sets out, reflects the wording within the order in terms of how that process will work. And it also, within that area, proposes a new proposal for members, which is that we introduce a petition scheme from the annual meeting to enable members of the public to bring petitions forward either to the combined authority or one of its meetings. That's a provision clearly district councils are already very familiar with in their workings, but it is new to us as a combined authority. Almost finally, in terms of the ethical standards, there are two documents there at Appendices 7 and 8. The first one under that is a proposed revision to the Members' Code of Conduct, taking on board the local government, the Committee on Standards in Public Life recommendations to update the Code of Conduct. And it may be that similar revisions have gone through through district council authorities. This did go to our Governance and Audit Committee in March, who have recommended it up to the combined authority. The revisions from our current Code of Conduct are shown in blue highlight on the appendix at Appendix 7, and Appendix 9 is a summary document to help draw out the changes within that. I should say that they are changes in terms of tone and style of it. The legal provisions haven't been altered in that at all. The other new document is the introduction of a member and officer protocol. Again, I think most councils are familiar to having these. We haven't had one previously. We have based our proposal on the Local Government Association Model Code. So that is the basis for that document at Appendix 8. I shall stop there, Chair, because that is the end of the constitutional changes. Subject to any questions or queries, I'm happy to move on to the remainder of the report.
Okay, thank you very much, Caroline. One of the benefits of going after others have gone as a devolved area is that we get to learn from other people's mistakes that were in other parts of the country. So it's good to be able to have that learning to build the right model for ourselves. Any comments or questions of Caroline? Obviously, there's some quite complex governance and bureaucracy in there. It looks like we're okay so far. Caroline, do you want to carry on?
Okay, thank you. So the remaining two parts of the report relate to Appendices 10 and 11. The first one here is at the last meeting of the Combined Authority, we were asked to instruct the Independent Remuneration Panel to provide recommendations to the authority on the allowances for the scrutiny members, chairs and deputy chairs based on the proposed 3 scrutiny committee model to come into effect from June. The report is here attached at Appendix 10 with their recommendations. This is the recommendations are for consideration by members of the Combined Authority, but it is for the authority itself to determine those allowances for scrutiny members. So I hope members have had a chance to have a look at the report and those recommendations. And the recommendation here is for the authority to determine the level of those allowances to come in from June.
Thank you very much, Caroline. Any questions or comments? Obviously, those are set by the Independent Remuneration Panel. We've not got a history of meddling with those in the Combined Authority. No. Anything else, Caroline? You want to go into the third part?
Finally, the last report from the IRP is here for information rather than decision, and that is in relation to advice we have sought from them on the level of allowance or remuneration for a deputy mayor for policing and crime should one be appointed. As the report sets out, that is ultimately a decision for the mayor once they are in office, but for best practice and transparency purposes, we have sought this advice and we present it here to the Combined Authority for information.
Thank you, Caroline. Again, that's with specific duties regarding each element of that salary scale, isn't it? So that's quite clear, I think, there. Any questions or comments for Caroline? No. No. Well, in that case, we'll move to voting on this item. Anything else, Caroline, you wish to say before we make that decision?
No, thank you, Chair. The recommendations, I think, are all clearly set out at the end of the report on page, just racing through to the page.
Keep going. It's a long report.
It's printed 74, it's 76 in the pack. So it's recommendations 10.1 to 10.5 there, Chair. Thank you.
I'm happy to propose those. Can I see all those in favour, please show? Thank you very much. That is carried. Thank you. Right. So with that, we move on to item 9, which is regarding the committees. Again, Caroline, is this you? Or is this Alan or Ben?
I think Ben is going to lead this item,
Ben,
but I'm here to answer any questions.
Off you go, Ben.
Thank you, Chair. So this paper is seeking revisions to the decision-making and subcommittee structure of the Combined Authority and the Local Enterprise Partnership. I'll take you through the paper at a fairly high level, if that's okay. I mean, obviously, the arrangements that we currently have served the Combined Authority and the Local Enterprise Partnership well. I think we think on reflection over the past couple of years, but the increases in functions and in budgets and decisions that have come partly as a result of the growth of the Combined Authority, partly as a result of the devolution deal, mean that the volume of decisions is increasing, and we need to reflect that in some of the decision-making structures. It's also important that we look that our structures are fit for purpose for the incorporation of the mayor, and with the kind of evolution of the Combined Authority, it's also right that we bring some more formal transparency to the corporate side of the organisation. And so the proposals that are in front of you this morning are a set of is a proposal for how we might implement that. And so we're seeking agreement to this framework, which would allow us to develop up the detail. and to allow local authorities to prepare for the members that they might want to put onto the new structures at the post-election at the annual general meeting of the CA in June. Perhaps the most important thing to say is that we're not seeking this as a finalised model, and we're not seeking to implement this on the result of your deliberations this morning. This is about agreeing a framework that allows us to be fit for purpose for the future, and then allow that to be worked up to a point that it would be agreed at the Combined Authorities annual general meeting on June the 24th. In terms of some of the principles, just that to reflect on those, and the paper talks through them at some depth. So I'm now looking at para 2.3, which is page 218 of the pack. Some of the key things are around wanting to retain and indeed deepen the valued relationship between the public and private sectors in the way that we currently work, and looking at how we might improve that and deepen that going forward. As I've said, the principle to increase the capacity of the decision making and the agility of the Combined Authority to make decisions in line with some of the demands set upon programmes, particularly those that come from central government. To give greater autonomy to some of the committees and increase the breadth of some of the delegated decision making that is possible, and to bring with that the benefit of allowing more local authority members to bring their expertise and to apply those in a more aligned way with the areas of decision making of the Combined Authority. And most importantly, it's to create a framework that is fit for purpose for future requirements. So with all those principles in mind, the paper has kind of gives an overview of some of the alternative options that have been considered, and then lights upon a proposal that's set out in some detail in the paper. Just again, drawing out some of the key elements of that proposal. First is that we retain the key alignment between the local enterprise partnership and the Combined Authority, drawing on the membership of both bodies in the subcommittee decision making structure, and that we then give scope for the creation of formal portfolios that will allow the committee structure to then to sit underneath that. And what we're proposing here is that each of those committees would be chaired by a member, but would have a deputy chair from the private sector, who would also have a vote on decisions taken on subcommittees. So strengthening both the private-public partnership and giving more capacity for delegated decision making. In practical terms, we're proposing that Transport Committee sits slightly apart from these arrangements at this point in time, reflecting both some of the statutory natures of the roles of the Combined Authority and the enhanced scrutiny arrangements that were approved through the last Combined Authority. And we're proposing that we need to look at how Transport Committee and how the transport scrutiny function might work, and to do a short review of that over the summer to enable any decisions to be taken thereafter. We're looking to evolve Investment Committee into what we're terming here on an interim basis as the Resources Committee, that would retain some of the flexibility that Investment Committee has to take decisions on programmes, but would be primarily focused on the Mayor's budget and on providing that transparency and accountability for corporate functions as well. The importance of inclusive growth, as you know, has been one that has grown over recent years. A committee was needed to begin to give momentum to that process, but what we're looking at now is mainstreaming that through the work of all of the subcommittees, and having the Combined Authority with an oversight and an overview role. And we're also very keen to reconvene the Leeds City Region Partnership Committee, which brings in the local authorities that surround West Yorkshire, So as the Combined Authority and the Local Enterprise Partnership, through various reviews and changes, have become more focused on West Yorkshire, we see that committee as being essential in ensuring the wider partnership can strengthen and deepen. Chair, the paper about these issues in more depth, but at this point, I think it's probably best to refer you to the annex that shows the current arrangements and the future arrangements. To just highlight that we've incorporated the police and crime mayoral functions in the diagram as well, but for members to note that they are separate, both in terms of budget and decision making from the Combined Authorities functions. And then just to refer you back to the recommendations, which are that we're seeking your views and if possible, your endorsement to this proposal, so that we can then work up the detail and allow authorities to consider the membership of the committees going forwards. And finally, just to say that, of course, none of this would come into effect until the annual general meeting, which will still allow time for the new mayor to influence and help shape these arrangements going forwards. I'll stop there, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. So now do you want to go silent, Ben? Because there's some howl around there. Certainly, I think it's great to see it laid out like this, so we can see it's clearly about how it all works, and actually the scope of everything the Combined Authority is going to be doing in the future is really quite exciting about the opportunities, really. Inclusive growth is tremendously important to me personally as leader of Bradford District, and I know it is to my colleagues across West Yorkshire as well. The single investment framework really is the key document, is it not, for inclusive growth to be put into that? I mean, can you just talk us a bit through that, Ben? Because that's the nuts and bolts, the engine room, isn't it, of how decisions are made?
So Chair, yes, the single investment framework will govern how the Combined Authorities budgets work, and we see that as a document alongside the assurance framework and future revisions to the assurance framework, and the strategic economic framework that sets the policy context, that will then be the key documents that the Combined Authority will use in shaping investment programmes going forwards. We see the Resources Committee as doing some of the kind of heavy lifting work in the preparation of that, for then it to be implemented through the Combined Authority.
Thank you, Ben. Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Chair. Just one point really for Ben. He did invite comments here. We have mentioned previously our unhappiness of the lack of political balance on the investment committee. We've raised it before, and I think there's no changes have been indicated in this paper that there'll be any political balancing of that membership. And I make the point only because I think if we want optimal decision making, the very best decisions, and transparency in the way that we indicate is beneficial, there should be some other voices around that table bringing alternative views to try to make the decision-making process better. So I mention it again, you know, I'm not making any claims for the Conservatives to be part of that, but I don't think that it should be simply portfolio holders and obviously a one-party committee, because it's so vitally important for the region. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. I mean, first of all, I think it's important to remind us all that this Combined Authority is the only Combined Authority in the country which has opposition members as voting members of its board. You are in the ultimate position here, you're making decisions here, but actually we're also making sure that the opposition are in charge of the scrutiny committees, are chairing those scrutiny committees. And to be a decision maker and a scrutiny chair, I think is a real confusion of governance arrangements. So I'm confident here that we have a good balance. I think, as I say, I think we're fairer and more inclusive politically than any other combined authority in the country. That may be to our cost as Labour leadership, of course, because your views are heard here on a regular basis. But I agree with you. I think it's the right way to run the combined authority going forward for such a politically evenly balanced place as West Yorkshire. I think it will stand in good stead for the future. So that's why we're doing it that way. And hopefully that's something we can agree on. Councillor Dalton, did you have a question?
Thanks, Chair. It's a variety on a theme here, I think. I think I'm more relaxed than Councillor Lee in terms of opposition presence at decision-making level. I'm more concerned by this new structure in what was mentioned by Ben in terms of transparency, because there are already tensions in the decision-making process when individual schemes, for instance, are promoted through local councils and the combined authority, and it's at what point it gets that local scrutiny as opposed to the combined authority level scrutiny to make sure that the scheme which actually gets delivered and approved is one that fits the needs and has gone through the consultation process properly within each authority. And I'm not sure this new structure responds to that tension, which is usually around sequencing of discussion. So to make sure that, for instance, executive boards in local authorities get sight of schemes before decisions are made on them by investment committees in a combined authority. And I'd like to see that referred to in what ultimately gets delivered. And my other query is around the portfolio holders. Are those portfolio holders selected by the mayor, or are those portfolio holders derived from the committee membership which they are leading, if you see what I mean? Because I think there's a tension there in terms of where their authority comes from if these are going to become decision-making bodies. And I think that's something that also needs clarifying. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Galton. So I'll revert to Ben with that, but just to say that I think it was necessary to move to this kind of structure because, as we heard earlier, employment and skills, for example, has gone from 17 million budget to 111 million budget. If we didn't have these committees in place, there would be essentially officer decisions, and that transparency and debate wouldn't happen in the public domain. And I thought that was an issue. So I think this is a better way of doing it because people can see what the decisions are, they can debate the decisions in public, and then a decision is reached and implemented that way. How it connects with the local authority, I've always thought that actually, West Yorkshire Combined Authority should be a sister authority to all our authorities, and they should have a really easy, good working relationship between each other. And it strikes me that perhaps we need to have a little bit of a think now the combined authority is growing about how that relationship works with each of the local authorities, so we've all got expectations of it. Ben, do you want to comment on
that? Chair, thank you. I think you've covered the main points. The only point I would add is that we're continually looking, and I know Melanie might want to come in on this, around how we best dovetail the combined authorities' decision making with the local authorities' approval process, and we've looked at options as to whether we could have similar templates or similar reports. We've not achieved that yet, but we'll continue to work with, particularly with the directors of development in the local authorities, to look at how these processes can be streamlined. I'll pick up the other point, if I may, as well, Chair, around who appoints portfolio holders. That ultimately that's the decision that would be taken through the combined authority at the AGM. We would expect that members and the mayor would be discussing what the practical arrangements about who would do what.
Thank you, Ben. Councillor Harrand, I think you were next.
Thanks, Chair. I accept what Ben was saying earlier about this not being the final document on the subject, and it sticks to broad principles. But it does draw attention in 210 and 211 about the potential for misunderstanding of the roles of Transport Committee and Transport Scrutiny Committee. And it's disappointing that we're not going to make those decisions now or in June. We need maximum clarity on these, the sooner the better. Ben referred to the changes, the debate take place over the summer and changes thereafter. Now, dates provide incentives. And I like to think that in people's minds, and preferably in print, we had dates for when those debates were going to be concluded, those recommendations move forward. And September 30th seems to be a long enough time for all these discussions to take place. And after that date, halfway through the municipal year, we should all know where we stand, that the confusion's gone. And this is a potential nettle here. We could all find ourselves stung by this uncertain relationship. So the sooner we grasp this nettle and sort it out, the better. And dates will provide the incentive to sort it out.
Thank you, Councillor Harrand. I'd agree. I'd love to have sorted out everything so it's all neat and tidy for the mayor coming. But there has been such a huge amount of to do and a huge amount of engagement to do to get to this stage. It just wasn't possible to get to the end of the Transport Committee stuff. It is a huge portfolio, huge, and obviously it's where the combined authority started from. And we need to get it right. So let's not rush something that is so vital. But I would love it to happen as quickly as possible. So I like things neat and tidy. I agree, and I would like this to be a similar area of neat and tidiness. Ben, do you want to come back in on that for Councillor Harrand, and then I'll go to Kim, who may well also have a view on the subject, given her area of responsibility.
Certainly, thank you, Chair. So I completely agree with Councillor Harrand's sentiment. I think there's two issues here. The first is that we are clear ahead of the AGM around the remit and scope of each of the scrutiny committees, because the paper is, and the previous paper on this and this paper still leave that question open. And the eagle-eyed of you will have looked at page 195 of the pack and will have realised that we talk about the Transport Scrutiny Committee in two different ways. So we need to finalise that, and that needs to be done ahead of the AGM, so that the local authorities can be clear as to what members they're appointing and to what remit. The review that the paper alludes to is then really about ensuring that we're not duplicating functionality between the Scrutiny Committee and Transport Committee, and then considering what the best way forward is. We're happy to come back with a note that suggests some milestone dates, if that would be helpful.
I think that is nodding about that, Ben. So yes, that would be helpful. Councillor Groves.
Thank you, Chair. Well, firstly, I think I really support more members being involved down at the combined authority. I think it's needed. There's some people with great skill sets across the region, so I think that will bring the additional resource that we need to make those informed decisions. In terms of the Transport Committee and the Transport Scrutiny Committee, it does take time to review. The role has grown, and it was only when I asked for an outline of the areas that I cover to help with this going forward that I recognised how much it has grown into a full-time practically position. So I think a review would be needed, and like you say, it's one of the most important things that we're going to have to manage. So it's important that times, that we don't rush it. So I disagree with Councillor Harrand in terms of a review in September. And the reason I disagree is that if we put people on the Transport Committee, which would have to put them on in June, and then take them off in September, we'd need to find other positions for them. So I think it needs to be understood. I think there's a lot of questions that need answering, and I need the officers' help and support, because I think about the Transport Committee and the Scrutiny Committee, that mine will be the first committee that meets, that the mayor is attending in a public forum, and there'll be lots of questions around these governance arrangements. And I think members will want to know exactly how we're going to manage this going forward. Secondly, in terms of the Investment Committee, I think it's really important that the members who are going to sit on these boards, as I said earlier, have the right training. The allowances actually don't start July, but I think if we could bring it in line maybe in June earlier, so that they can get down and get the training and the assurance framework with all the scrutiny skills that the people are going to bring from the districts, will just make it even more robust. I think there's two things that I picked out of the document that I felt we should consider. One was in terms of an investment person in a portfolio role. We've seen, and I don't want to labour on this, that actually, the government have been too close to business over the past few weeks. So we need to protect that person in that role. And I think that's where we have business people down at WYCA, that is really helpful. They do go out and talk to businesses, bring investment in, but we must protect that portfolio lead. And the other thing that I felt was missing, the district committees are spoken about, but actually when you change in a transport committee, you will have less members to run the district committees. And I think actually the public's involvement and how we take the people with us on this is so important. So I would like to see more about how we're going to take the public with us on these, with these new boards. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Groves. And that sort of illustrates really why it's going to take a bit longer to do this Transport Committee review than it is the others, because the districts really do need to be involved in it and need to be happy with the outcome. And because it affects so many people individually, their individual daily lives, we need to get it right. I mean, I certainly wouldn't envisage a change being made mid-year, I have to say, but I would expect the review to happen as quickly as possible. Roger, you want to come in now?
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to make a comment, Chair, that I'm personally, as well as I'm sure the business community generally, will be delighted that the progressive nature of our approach in West Yorkshire is that the partnership will continue to be alive and well and bring the best of both the private and the public sector at the committee level. So I just wanted to acknowledge that, but also reinforce, I think it is a very distinctive, but it's actually at the root of a lot of our success. The things we do together become rather ordinary, but when viewed from other places, seem rather extraordinary in terms of the results we achieve. It's a question, and it's more detailed perhaps down the line. The reintroduction of the partnership committee, I think, is a very sensible step. I hope that the principle of involving the private sector, including both of the geographies, perhaps may translate into that once it's clear what the terms of reference of that partnership committee is. But and as others have said, there's still some further detail to work out. But with my private sector hat on, I as I say, in my own mind, it further demonstrates the progressive approach of all of the parties who are working towards a collective impact to common agenda. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Roger. Certainly you can't do things like transport and employment and skills without connecting closely with the private sector to make sure we're providing the skills and the connectivity that they need to employ more people and do well and increase our productivity as a region. I'll go straight to Councillor Pandore now. Councillor Pandore.
Thanks, Chair. Just to remind people the importance of inclusive growth. There's been a separate panel which I've chaired for the last few years, and we've got some excellent officers who are really committed, who are completely behind this agenda. The LEP's been working really hard as well, and the LEP's fully behind this agenda as well, and so is the Combined Authority. And back in at local level, within local authorities, I'm sure all the leaders across the patch have got their own plans around inclusive growth. And I think moving forward, I think to be honest with you, I think it's a step change. I think that it's a right change in terms of making sure that one way to embed inclusive growth across the Mayoral Combined Authority to actually make it everybody's business, and that's the only way we can actually start to make that big impact. Because some could argue that actually we need a separate panel. The separate panel has been working for a number of years, and I think it's the right time for that transformation to take place, because we all understand it. We've all got a framework, we've got very clear linkages, and I think with the private sector, they get the agenda as well. Alan's wrote to all the members, thanking them for the hard work, and there will be hopefully a place for the members of the panel to be somewhere within the new structure. And I think just finishing on the private sector involvement, that is critical, because As the public sector body, we can only do so much around inclusive growth. We need to get private sector partners in there, and any new partnership has got to have that private sector involvement to actually drive that inclusive growth agenda forward. And that thematic approach is the right approach. So what I'm really saying is, officers don't need to worry. We fully appreciate the work they've done, and there's a lot more work to come through. And the private sector has been really great. We need to work with them more strongly. And this will be everybody's business, not just one panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Pondo. I mean, we like officers to worry a little bit, to be honest. And I think you're absolutely right about inclusive growth being everybody's business. And certainly, I think all the committees should have inequality as part of their objectives about how they're going to overcome inequality in the region. And I think whether it's transport, employment of skills, climate emergency, it applies absolutely at the top of everybody's priority list across all those measures. And we should have a good story to tell about how we've reduced inequalities as a result of all the work we've done. Otherwise, why we're doing this? This is the purpose, to make sure that everybody reaches their potential. It means that in the end, the region will therefore be more affluent, will be able to compete nationally and internationally if we achieve that goal. And I think it's a real no-brainer. So thank you for all the work you've done on that to get it really going this year, Councillor Pandor, and make sure it's much more prominent with all of us. And I know you're doing some good work in Kirklees as well, so I'll look forward to seeing the outcome of the commission. Councillor Harrand, and then I'll go back to Ben, so I've kept him silent for a while now, and I'm sure he wants to come back on some of those points. Councillor Harrand, did you want to come back in?
Yes,
then I'll bring
one sentence. I think Ben, contribution after I spoke, suggested he could bring forward a timetable. Now that's not been superseded by your comments and Councillor Grove's comments. We're still going to get a draft.
A timetable for the review, I presume. Yes, absolutely. Yes. Yeah, but I'm just saying the changes might not be able to be made mid-year, Councillor Harris. I would suggest that's not great to make changes mid-year in decision making. We do need to get on with the business in hand, I would suggest. And just knowing how long it's taken us to get to the progressive structure we've got at the moment has taken quite a few months to get there. So Ben, did you want to come back on a few of those points raised by, first of all, Councillor Harrand, of course, but Councillor Pandor and Roger also spoke there.
Chair, thank you. I don't think I've got much to add, in the sense of, I think those comments are all sensible. Councillor Pandor's comments about the inclusive growth are absolutely right, and we do need to reflect. We will ensure they're reflected in the terms of reference for the individual committees. On the basis of the conversation that you've just had, we'll bring forward a timeline for the review of transport scrutiny and the Transport Committee, with a view that we'll try and complete the review as rapidly as possible, with a view that it would then be brought in at the next, not the one coming this June, but the June after that, to provide certainty to the local authorities and to others. And I think on Roger's points around the involvement of the private sector, I mean, I think that's absolutely right, and we're looking to ensure that the private sector has got a key role and a strengthened role, and that's kind of regardless of where the government gets to in terms of its LEP review. I think the work that we've been doing collectively has been that the strength of the partnership that we have has served us well, and will become more important as the combined authority makes its decisions with its new devolved budgets.
Okay, thank you very much. Roger, did you want to come back briefly there?
Yes, only briefly, Chair, and I don't want to sound like I'm fencing words with you or anybody else, but I guess it's much more personal that the region's aspiration, with great respect, is not about reducing inequality. It's about an aspiration to create equality, which by dint of logic means that deprivation and poverty progressively is a thing of the past. But it's just, I guess, that may be just presentationally, but I do think it reflects more of our progressive nature, and hence inclusive growth point. I do think at a practical level we'd have to review, is it as embedded enough as it is, but that's perhaps somewhere down the line, because it is quite a challenging topic, and we're only at the early stage of our of our development, and I pay tribute to the work that Councillor Pandor's led. But I just have some unbridled nervousness, just to make sure that we keep it in mind that actually this is the ultimate prize. The economic is the means to delivering that prize. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, I think we're in violent agreement with each other, Roger. We're just talking a bit different, slightly different language, but no, I think we agree with each other. So any questions further of Ben before we move to voting? Okay, then, well, in that case, I'm happy to propose the recommendations that are outlined in the paper. Can I just see all those in agreement, please show? Thank you, that is carried. Thank you very much. And then I think after that, the only thing I think was for noting was some minutes at the end, were there? Let me just sort of remind myself what was at the end of this agenda.
It's the report for information, like you say, about the minutes.
All right, thank you. Yes, of course. Yeah. Minutes for information. Yes, thank you very much for that, which are just for noting. So with that then, I wish everybody well, and thank you very much for joining us this morning, and we'll see you at the next Combined Authority meeting. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Chair.
Bye.